happy Independence Day, and also welcome to a very special edition of the Roundtable, the NewsX Sunday Guardian Roundtable. This week we're going to be discussing the protesting Indian. Do we protest too much or too little in India? And when do we know if a protest has gone too far? To help me decode this, I have with me a very good panel. I have Manish Tiwari from the Congress, Rama Lakshmi of the Washington Post, Ashutosh from the Aam Aadmi Party, and Chandan Mitra from the BJP. Manish, I'll start by beginning with you, especially keeping in mind the Congress that is really protesting and log-jamming a whole monsoon session of Parliament. Is it a good protest, a good medium, a good tool?
But I think it's an intrinsic part of democracy. And when now it's been sanctified that disruption is a legitimate parliamentary tactic. So therefore, to resort to that tactic is perfectly democratic. And if you look at it in a longer historical perspective, I think protest is a part of our DNA. So going back to the 1000 AD till about 1707, we kept fighting against every invader who came. Then we fought against the British till 1947. After that, we've been fighting with each other. So therefore, I think it is very intrinsic to our DNA, the whole notion of protest. So if we do not find anybody else, then at times we protest against our own selves also.
Rama, do you agree? It's an intrinsic part of his DNA, I know.
But yes, and I think Aam Aadmi Party kind of made it cool again to protest, the street protests. And lots of people are wading into the same tactic. And yesterday's shirtless protest was straight out of AAP's rule book, I was saying, to get that visual media and the drama. So it has become one way of getting heard. And with television media the way it is today, you have to have drama and high volume to grab their attention. So it has become the modus operandi for not just political parties, but a whole lot of people. Protests earlier used to be these boring Gandhian protests tucked away in some corner of Jantar Mantar. They were kind of ghettoized protests. And with Aam Aadmi Party, it all came down, and Nirbhaya, it came down to India Gate again. So the middle class came out to protest and it became respectable again. And that's what you're seeing now. You made protest respectable, Ashutosh?
See,
cool,
I think
sorry,
this
cool is the word used.
I think I fully agree with Manish when he says that to protest is it's very, very democratic in the sense. See, it's better to protest than to keep quiet and be silent. And unfortunately, we are India. That's why we say that to protest is creating a spectacle, and we can say that it's a drama. But you go back to the Russian countries and you go to the communist countries, you realize how important the protest is as a means to express yourself. And those people, if the minute Germany stopped protesting, Hitler was born. The minute Russian stopped protesting, Stalin was born. The minute even in Argentina, when the people stopped protesting, 30,000 people were drowned and nobody had any idea where these people have gone. So I think those who make fun of protesting, I think there should be something wrong with them. They should analyze that we do not realize the importance of living in a democracy because we live in a democracy. We protest, that's why we don't realize the importance of protesting. Ask those people who have no right to protest.
And then by being in government, you take a different view of this.
No, I don't think it has anything to do with government.
All right.
And I'm expressing my personal views here, not necessarily those of the government. And I tend to agree with what your panelists have said so far. Protest is an intrinsic part of democracy. And the day you stop protesting, you are really asking for trouble. You are asking for dictatorship to take over. I don't disagree, although I don't entirely agree with the examples Ashutosh gave. But you see, I would just add a caveat. The protest that goes beyond a certain point of acceptability starts injuring the system and causing, you see, governments are unable to function. And that in turn creates further conditions for protest, because protest, I think, has to stay within a certain boundary and limit. If it goes beyond that, it becomes self-defeating and self-destructive, and something that we are seeing in Parliament right now. So I think that is an example of that when things cross that boundary. But nevertheless, I would say that I will defend the right of people to protest with the proviso that I hope that everybody realizes that the protest should not start damaging society and the economy beyond a particular point.
When does the protest go too far? When does it become harmful?
Well, I think I would tend to disagree with what Rama was saying. The protests that you've been seeing over the past 4 or 5 years in India are really timid. You have to rewind back to the 70s to really see as to what real protests were all about. Chandan would have a historical memory of the period between 73 and 75 when the entire Jayaprakash Narayan movement was at its peak, and subsequently again from 77 to 80 when the Congress took to the streets. I recall a point in time in 88 when Mr. Tikait had brought 3.5 or 4 lakh people and parked them all at India Gate. So therefore, those were protests. What you see today are really spectacles, where I tend to agree with her, created for the electronic media. It's not a protest as protests used to be in democracy. So therefore, I don't think we are really going too far. We are, in fact, only doing a bit of a thing so that, you know, you get your coverage and then the cameras will multiply it 100 times over. You know, India used to see real solid protests 2 decades back.
But also, Rama, it's, we also the age of Twitter, the age of, you know, part of what you're saying also appeals to that kind of this thing. So what do you make of the protests on Twitter, the anonymous protests? Are they influential?
I think it's an important, I think Twitter is the new town square, and you know, those arguments are important. These arguments, some of these arguments, as whether it's Amartya Sen, you know, the argumentative Indian, or Naipaul, who talks about the million mutinies, these have to be conducted in on every stage, not just on the street, on every stage. Social media is an important platform for that. And the anonymous protester, I think there's absolutely nothing wrong. I mean, people like to call them trolls and dismiss them, but I think it is a town square, and once you put yourself out there, you've got to take all kinds of attack, because you've putting forth a position and you should be able to defend it. And I don't think Twitter is a very unhealthy platform. Some people do think that it's gone too far, but I don't think so. I think it's a very healthy platform. Having said that, this whole question you asked about when does it injure the system, I think somewhere the social contract is probably breaking, and this whole notion of governments listening and participating and consultative approach to decision making, that's ripping, and that's why you're seeing louder and louder protests and angry. And this whole phrase, too much democracy, when did we start hearing this phrase, too much democracy? I think in the last 10 years during UPA, during Nandigram and things like that, lots of people started using too much democracy. I think that injured our system much more than these protests.
Do you agree? I mean, you are a party that has seen both sides of protests, you know. You've been
there is
by it and cut by it.
There are the two shades of your question. One is there is a narrative which has been very consciously being built that to protest is anti-development. That's a dangerous narrative which has been built off and on, and it started since 2010, 2011 onward, that anybody who's protesting, they'll call it an anarchy and they'll link it that it is anti-development. They don't want development to happen, and that is why they are protesting. That's a dangerous, that's a typical dictatorial.
That's the nature, because you're always protesting against the establishment.
No, always.
Mostly.
See, I go back what Manish said, that in 1972, I remember when JP took the reins of the movement in his hand, and he said that in decision making I will be the last person, and then he had given call to the army and the police that don't obey the illegal orders. I think in the last 4 or 5 years nothing of that sort has happened. On the social media thing, I fully agree that social media has made our democracy more vibrant, and it has created a platform where even if you try to suppress voices, you cannot. I know that most of the time I get abused, and very badly abused, all kinds of words are used, but I think the best thing which has happened in the last 3-4 years is that the democracy and the freedom of expression, which has provided a platform to each and every individual as a citizen in this country. Otherwise, that was not available most of the time. I think that's the best thing which has happened, despite being abused so many times and all the time.
No, I think you see, I have marginal disagreements with some panelists. Now, let's look at what has happened to our electronic medium and the social media as well. Now, what do we get excited about, or what would the electronic media want us to believe? Take the recent issue of pornography, on banning pornography sites. My God, for 3 days, as if there was nothing else happening in the country, or no other issue of any concern. I mean, is this something to really protest about? And I see Pakistan and pornography as the two issues on which we seem to get most agitated, particularly on the electronic medium, and therefore the quality of protest should also matter. The quality of protest, I think, to which, without using the term, Manish was drawing attention, the kind of protests that Jayaprakash Narayan led, the kind of multitudes we saw on the streets, not only in Delhi but all over the country, that really ushered a change. But today we don't see that. We don't see those kind of protests at all. Protests are happening primarily in television studios and through the social media. There is very little public involvement in that protest. And to the credit of the Aam Aadmi Party, I think Mr. Kejriwal did bring out people on the streets for a period, but that has also got dissipated as he is now in power. So I think, these things rise and fall over time, but I think I am concerned about the quality and the kind of subjects over which we are protesting today.
Well, we need to take a short break, but don't go away. As you can see, this is getting to be quite an interesting discussion. So come back after the break. We're going to be discussing the right to protest, the right to go on Twitter, and much more. Welcome back to a special roundtable on the right to protest. Quality of protest. I mean, we protest when we take a weak stand on terrorism. We protest when a terrorist is hanged. There's no consistency.
I think
and frivolous issues are coming up.
I think it's something deeper. You see, for example, there was a very disturbing headline in one of the newspapers today, saying that the Supreme Court has asked the government to regulate the social media. Possibly there seems to be a misunderstanding with regard to the democratization which the social media has brought about into the entire discourse.
It's a deja vu of Kapil Sibal.
In the sense that notwithstanding all the trolls and the perverts and the bhakts, who abuse the anonymity which a new media offers, to possibly ventilate their abused child syndrome. But the fact is that once you start drawing lines, I may like to draw it here. Some obscurantist may want to draw it to the right. So therefore, I think regulating the new media is an extremely bad idea. Number two, the whole dynamic of protests has changed because the entire communication paradigm has changed. You no longer require so many people out in the streets because people can articulate themselves in a different way altogether. And yes, Chandan has a point that at times we do get carried away, but then let's understand that television is not all about news. It's not about current affairs. It's about creating the tamasha, which needs to bring in the revenue, because the lala who underwrites the check, is really looking at his bottom line. He's not looking at the quality of news that you're putting out. So therefore, if you do not create that spectacle, you do not get the TRPs, they do not translate into advertising revenue, and thus this entire great media revolution can fall flat on its backside. I mean, that's a reality.
Are you saying that approvingly? Are you saying that approvingly?
No, I'm not saying it approvingly. I'm not saying it approvingly. This is the reality. Unfortunately, one of the most corrosive legacies of liberalization has been the manner in which we've handed out television licenses. I mean, which country has 813 or 815 television channels? And to top it all, out of the 415 news and current affairs channels which are there, the total viewership is only 7% of the entire television universe. 93% people only watch soap. So therefore, you see, you have a revenue reality which is competing against what you call the frivolity of news, and that frivolity is in fact deliberate because it is catering to a certain sensibility which possibly likes it.
No, but Manish, there is also a problem that sometimes in the pursuit of TRPs, we all know that news is often manufactured, and very dangerous news is manufactured. You will remember the case in Guwahati where a girl was kind of molested as part of a staged drama with television cameras waiting to shoot that. And it was a new channel which wanted to attract attention. So I think these are very dangerous.
What will a news channel do? But what will a news channel do? Ultimately, till the time, ultimately, till the time you do not build up subscription revenue, you do not take the dependence of advertising revenue off, you will unfortunately have this aberration. So therefore, there is a revenue model which needs to be corrected, which will then bring about a certain modicum of sobriety in the discourse. I mean, that's a reality. Unfortunately, nobody wants to talk about it.
But Manish, it's typical of the establishment logic, because if in last
that's the journalist in you talking.
No, I'm not talking about a journalist.
A whole lot of journalists have actually, Manish, you're the only one.
The fact is, if Chandan is going back to the Assam and quoting one particular incident, that way if you take few examples from this government or your government, that doesn't mean that the government has, as a democratic tool has ceased to exist, needs some other kind of. So one example cannot be the part of the rules. Secondly, I prefer to have not 800, sir, I prefer not to have 800 channels, but 8,000 channels, because that is taking the democracy at the grassroots level.
Now he's talking like a politician.
We cannot have the elitist idea that only 4 channels should be there and they should be talking something like this. Because India is a country where on the chai ka dhaba, on the panchayat, people love to talk, and that's why India is so democratic despite being so much chaos around.
Ashutosh, after you.
Yeah.
Ashutosh, the difficulty is that there is a difference between diversity and market fragmentation. After all, television channels do not run on love and fresh air.
Yes.
They run on money, or any publication runs on money. And if you are going to have a market fragmentation of this scale, then obviously you're going to have aberrations. Then it becomes a dog-eat-dog market.
I'm not in favor of regulating, but I must say that when the protests happen, they are highly exaggerated and encouraged by the owners because they don't want restrictions. You will see that time there are certain newspapers and certain TV channels which are at the forefront of kind of sensationalism, suddenly start being very holier than thou and say media is in danger, media is being attacked, and we have to allow, 24/7 opening of pubs, 24/7 showing of porn on TV, there should be no restrictions. Now, can a society really afford that?
I think rather than the number of news channels, we should also look at the pattern of ownership. How many news channels are owned by political parties, politicians? How many are owned by businessmen, business houses? That is the crux of the debate. What is the
behind every
quality
protest
of the
is the
news?
agenda.
Yeah. Not just behind every protest, but I'm just saying we need to look at the quality of news and the agenda behind the news, and not just the number of news channels. That's irrelevant, I think.
For example, if you look at the telecom sector, why was the telecom sector in India opened up in a progressive manner? 2 licenses to begin with, then a 3rd player, then a 4th player, and the moment you made it unregulated, you had anarchy in that sector. The reason was because only a limited number of players can survive given that the pie which is available. And that's why at some point in time, there is a strong case for statutory self-regulation. Government regulation is a very bad idea of the media.
Right.
But some modicum of statutory
self-regulatory
but
bodies.
it doesn't have a statutory basis. It needs to be underpinned by a statutory basis. I think that's the point of disagreement.
Regulate ourselves in sense of the sensational news, the manufacturing news.
See, somebody who
But that's the rule of the market. The more you sell news that doesn't work.
No, I tell you what, because
Sorry, Priya, when agenda is coming, and you see people with deep pockets who are running these media houses have an agenda and they push it down our throats. I think that that's the time when you start missing any kind of regulatory mechanism. I don't think there's any
But
case.
that's a fact,
But
Chandan.
the media is gunning for the government. In fact, the government's problem today is that it is being
So
attacked by the
think
media
it's a problem.
left, right, and
You
center.
think it's a problem?
No, but then
because Sushma,
government
she
has
is
done
there.
nothing about it. I mean, what can you do? But allege that the government is trying to control the media. Look at the way our ministers are in trouble. If the government could control them, you think that this wouldn't have stopped?
The reality is that pressures on owners is a reality, in the sense that yes, this government is doing it. I am not saying that the previous government did not try and moderate the discourse. The fact is that politicians and governments do it, and it is not only that the people in government do it.
His government does it.
People in opposition do it as much.
I wish
His government does
people
it.
in opposition do it as much.
I will give you an example just after this program ends.
No, I think you do it now. Chandan, the program is going to
When
end.
there are so many politicians who are trying to control the content, what is so wrong if people, common people, come on the street trying to compete with that kind of control, because the louder they shout, that's the only time when the TV channels listen to them or show them. That's a power balancer.
That's
But
that's where the new media comes in.
Because
That's where the new media comes in, because it democratizes the discourse. Today, every anchor, every editor has his own Twitter constituency. And if he starts getting beaten on that Twitter constituency, at times against his own convictions, you know, he will change the editorial line. So therefore, there is another danger which has crept in as a result of not only politicians having constituencies, but now now even those who are supposed to take a dispassionate view, responding, you know, more to their constituencies rather than to convictions.
That's true.
That's
Twitter is the equalizer.
That's where the debate
final.
on the freedom of expression is getting more complicated and more complex. You know, now what is happening? There are the politicians, there are political parties who are having their own set of entire infrastructure, and if they want to affect and promote a particular kind of ideology, a particular kind of viewpoints on that particular, I've seen editors changing their editorial debating points in the night because they have said we are getting too much views on this, so let's take this. I've seen myself all. So that's what I'm saying. It's not a simplistic thing. It's getting complicated and complex. That proves the point India as a democracy is evolving to a next level of democracy. We might have a problem with that, but it's a process of evolution. We have to accept that.
Yeah, that I agree. But then you see, you have just said that very often so many tweets keep coming that editors themselves develop self-doubts that whether what I'm doing is right or wrong. But then are you sure that all those tweets are genuine?
No,
are you
no,
sure
that's what I said.
that those who are kind of tweeting to the editors are actually not doing it as part of a politician's or a political party's agenda?
Well, we run out of time now. As you can see, we began as a debate on protest, the right to protest. It went on the right to freedom of expression, whether there is some agenda behind the social media. We talked about new media. But that's all from us from now. Thank you for watching this edition of Roundtable. We'll see you again, same time next week.